Welcome to Dhaka Tribune Presents Straight Talk. I'm Dhaka Tribune editor Zafar Sobhan, and I'm here today with Quazi, Zulquarnain, and Islam. We're going to be talking European football. Zulquarnain, they have introduced you on the poster as a sports enthusiast, but I don't think that really does you sufficient credit. So I should mention here that you are a former sports reporter, a sports journalist in Bangladesh of some repute, and honestly, the person who knows the most about football that I know, which is why I have invited you on the show today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Zafar, and I'm actually glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's get started. Last weekend was the start of EPL. Now, of course, we're here to talk about European football, but in the context of Bangladesh, EPL is really, what most people look forward to. It's most people's first love. And so, I think we're going to probably focus on that a little. What were your thoughts from the first weekend? I mean, it's still Manchester United, Man City haven't yet played, but,
Yeah, no, I think overall, again, I think this is going to be a pretty exciting season, obviously coming on the back of COVID. There is like a pall of gloom that hangs over the seasons, and it's still a little bit strange to see football being played without fans in the stadium, even though they're trying to mix in crowd noises from time to time.
I'd expect that the technology would be better. I mean, not only can you have crowd noises, they should be able to have like holographic images of people. So it looks like the stadium is full. How hard would that be? I mean,
not too hard, I think, but I think just like we've not built the technology to do that because we've never had to manufacture atmosphere, quote unquote, in a football stadium, given that football fans have been well known for
Korea that there was that huge mess up because they wanted to have mannequins in the stands.
Okay? Yeah, I did.
But somehow they ended up with sex robots, which I'm sure would have encouraged the players. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's
indeed.
In terms of atmosphere. But,
no, there's been some clubs who've been actually, I don't know if you've seen, like experimenting with the idea of having a giant screen at the back of their goalposts with with people zooming in from home to kind of watch their actually heroes live. It's been an interesting experiment. I don't know if it's been super successful, but some of these new ways that clubs are evolving, trying to
I think there's got to be a way they'll figure this out because, at the end of the day, when you think about any game, okay, you might have, 50, 60,000 in the stadium watching, but the vast majority of people, view the vast majority of football matches on television. So for you and me, that really our experience. So my experience, you're in Amsterdam, so you have the opportunity to see live European football a little more than I do. But here in Bangladesh, if I'm watching European football, I'm obviously going to experience it through television. So my experience should not really be that different. I don't know.
No, not at all. I think indeed. So I think definitely. My sense is that in the next couple of years, we're going to see some really interesting experiments on that techscape where we have, football fans being able to experience games in a lot more, immersive environment. I mean, we have new technologies like VR, 3D, etc. And you can sit at home and potentially do that. So that's another interesting story. But I think the point that goes back to what we were trying to discuss at the start is that there's a lot of interest, particularly in English Premier League, obviously vis-a-vis it being one of the best produced products available for football. I think the English Premier League itself, the TV sort of production around it, the language also helps in its reach. And I think obviously, as you said, it's probably the league that has the single most outreach in terms of mass appeal. So I think, getting that restarted again has been quite interesting. I think for me, the first weekend action, I caught a few games. It all seemed quite exciting. But I think a couple of things that stood out for me, obviously, is the fact that I think this time you have in the Premier League at least 7 or 8 clubs who are quite well stocked, right? I think I was watching, for instance, Everton versus Tottenham, and you have, two managers like Carlo Ancelotti and actually like Mourinho, who are managing probably 2 teams who may not even finish in the top 4 of the Premier League. Right? And those guys are like...
It would be a surprise if either of them did,
Yeah, exactly. It would be a surprise. But I mean, these are both players and these are both actually like managers of some repute in the international game, and them managing potentially, quote unquote, second tier slightly sides of the Premier League tells you the appeal that the Premier League has, and also not just in terms of mass appeal, but also in terms of business and financial appeal as well. And you have players like James Rodriguez signing for Everton, and starting. He played really well in the first game. You have now Spurs being linked to Gareth Bale. So I think it's it's quite exciting to see. And I think this season we'll have a very strong concentration of very, very top level talent in the Premier League.
What I like about the Premiership is that, you know, you have a lot of these teams who are not necessarily top tier teams. And even if you look at them man for man, player for player, they don't really have the top talent which a Liverpool or a Manchester City or a Chelsea would have, but they're just damn good teams. And, you know, they come together. And we saw that a few years ago when Leicester won the Premiership. But Leicester, again, you know, they're a pretty good team, but they don't have any world beaters. Wolves, the same caliber, I would say. Leeds United, again, you know, no world beaters, but they gave Liverpool, you know, who are possibly, you know, together maybe with Bayern, one of the best teams in the world, a hell of a run for their money.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think it all goes back to the financial point that I was mentioning earlier, right? And if you look at, you know, the top 20 clubs in the world, by actually I think sort of revenue or top line, you'll see that, you know, Premier League has probably like 8 or 9 representatives there. So I think there's a lot of financial like muscle that the Premier League has, and since it has that financial like muscle, it can also attract, like you said, either really good players or solid players into mid-level teams who are able to pay the players the amount that they want or they deserve. And essentially that leads to, you know, some very, very strong teams developing across the board, which you probably don't see in so many other leagues. And I think that's what makes it quite exciting as well.
Yeah, well, actually, it's interesting. That's a good segue to talk a little bit about La Liga, which, you know, in many ways, again, if you're looking at, you know, the Champions League is your yardstick for domination. So the last decade has really been, you know, La Liga's decade, right? But at the same time, you know, actually, if you look at it, the talent there doesn't really go that deep. You know, it's you got Real Madrid, Barcelona, and to some extent Atletico, and then, you know, you have the other teams. You got Sevilla, you got Valencia, but, you know, it doesn't really go quite as deep. Maybe it has in the past few years, but now with Ronaldo out and Messi on his way out, it seems to me that La Liga may be. It seems to me their domination of the last decade has squarely been based on the fact that both Ronaldo and Messi have been there, and they're looking within 12 months from now, neither of them might be there.
Yeah, I know that's an interesting point, and I think yeah, again, I mean, I don't fully agree. I mean, I think the La Liga also has super good talent in depth. Maybe we don't see them or we're not exposed to them as much. And I think if you look at performances and say things like the Europa League, I mean, Sevilla, as you mentioned, is a team that has performed consistently well there, and they're probably not really a top 3, top 4 team in Spain, but they've done really well. I think what's quite interesting, and as you said, I squarely agree with that point, though, which is that, you know, Ronaldo and Messi, you know, being at the peak of their powers over the last decade has seen the La Liga kind of dominate the European stakes consistently. And I think this might be on the way down as well, given Barcelona are maybe set to lose Messi in 12 months. It was actually going to be almost this year, but then they're also in a complete mess financially, right? I mean, if you look at their you know, wages to turnover like ratio, their governance, it's incredibly bad. They're paying really high salaries to over the hill players. You know, wages to turnover like ratio is through the roof, and you know, with Messi going out the door, they're probably not going to be able to attract as much.
Where would you like to see Messi go, and where do you think he may go in 12 months?
I think we discussed this, no? But I think for me, it would be, I mean, personally, I would be super excited to see him at like Juventus, and we have like, you know, one final swan song with like Ronaldo and Messi playing together, like the 2 greatest players of the last generation, maybe 2 of the best of all time playing together would be really great to see. But I think personally, he will probably end up at Man City. I think that's probably the team where he has a manager who trusts him, a system which he can fit into, and you know, for the last couple of years of his life, it might be a really good spot.
The deal Man City offered Barca was pretty, you know, it was a pretty decent deal, all things considered. You know?
Yeah, I mean, if I was Barca, I would take the deal, honestly. I'd say, you know, I mean, I think it's more of a political posturing at this stage to keep Messi because, you know, he went out and said this. But in some ways, I think if they had cashed in on Messi, I think Barca would have been in a position to rebuild their squad completely just by the amount of money that they would get from him and amount of money that they would not have to pay him over the next year as well. So it would have been honestly a smart business move. I completely realized it would have been a disastrous political move. And with Barca, as you mentioned, the governance of this club often leads to decision making that is not smart. It's more political in some cases. Not that those two aren't connected.
Politically, I mean, well, you know, how great is it to keep him at the team just for one more year, disgruntled, unhappy, in where he's going to essentially walk for free at the end of the year? I mean, I don't, even from a political perspective, I think it's almost like, I can see ego being involved.
I mean, it's basically Bartomeu saying that he's not going to be president next year, so he doesn't want to be the guy who says, I let go of Messi under my tutelage. He left the club. So it's entirely political in my view, because elections are going to happen next year.
As long as it happens like the day after he leaves.
I'm fine.
Like, I'm good. You can't say it was me.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if that does happen, then that's going to necessarily save his legacy, I have to say.
I don't think that it will, but I think that's what he's thinking. So I think that's the strange, that somehow people in this kind of power often think that that would make a big difference, when in reality it probably won't. But he just wants history to be written on his own terms, I guess. So
well, good luck with that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then with Real Madrid, I think what was quite interesting is that they've kind of adapted somewhat of a strategy that Barcelona adapted earlier. They're buying like younger players and not really world stars as much. I mean, I kind of grew up watching Real Madrid buy Galacticos. Every season they would sign up, the best player in the world. And although they've done that to some extent with Gareth Bale and Hazard, but now they've also mixed that with some really other smart buys with players with high potential, slightly younger age, who they can probably potentially leverage for a longer period of time or sell on for actually like profits. So I think they've been surprisingly quiet in the transfer window this year, which is a big surprise given.
Let's go back to switch gears and go back to EPL.
Yeah.
There are a lot of good teams, and so basically, we still haven't seen Man City or Man U play, but Chelsea, Liverpool. Chelsea, I mean, people don't talk about Chelsea, but they've quietly done a lot of stocking up over the summer, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it's hardly been quietly, I think, right? I think they've been really going out all guns blazing. They had a transfer ban, and they just kind of bought about 2-3 windows worth of players in one window, right?
You're right. What I mean by quietly is when I hear people talk about the who's going to win the Premiership, the discussion still centers around Man City and Liverpool. Whereas, people don't tend to think, well, maybe they think, well, this is going to be a transition season for Chelsea, but they've done it in the past where they've actually taken what should have been a transition season and overperformed, surprise people.
Yeah, so for sure. I feel like maybe actually winning the Premier League will be a step too far for their team. I think they have a young team. I think they're building more for say 2-3 year cycle, and then in the second or third year maybe they'll win. They have Frank Lampard, who's been an interesting manager. I mean, he's a really sort of dedicated to playing attacking football overall. And I think he has a really good squad from an attacking perspective. On a more defensive side, and some of it also goes out to him, they're not that great. But I think if he can resolve some of those issues, Thiago Silva came in.
A common problem would seem. I mean, it seems to me it's mind-blowing how so many managers, when they build teams, they forget about their defense. Or the other basic level is oftentimes people will sign too many people for the same position and leave some positions undermanned and other positions massively overmanned. It's like, come on, you got to.
I think that's actually a great point, and I think how teams are adapting or changing that right now is that you see that the structure of Premier League clubs are changing a lot. I think in previous times, I mean, you'd be most familiar with an Alex Ferguson style of management where he's one guy who's in charge of everything. He's like the coach, the manager, the guy who buys players, everything. And now teams are kind of evolving to have a sporting director in place who's in charge of transfers and stuff, and then more of a coach, first team coach in place. So they divided that Ferguson role that no one could probably do on their own anyways into 2 or 3 roles.
And the thing is that and that's that's in many ways that's brought over from North America, because in North America you have the GM, the general manager of operations, and then you have the coach. And in a sense, if in Moneyball they talk about the coach being like a middle manager. That they're not the most important person. And and I read a book some years back where they talked about Olympic Lyon, and they adapted that structure, and and they went through a phase where I think they won the French national championship 7 or 8 times in a row. Now, of course, with big PSG money coming in, they've kind of been shunted aside, but they've been trying that model as well. But what I think is interesting to me, and I mean, I think more than anything, if you're going to learn from the North American model of sports management and of running a sports team, is that coming from, I used to watch a lot of basketball when I lived in the States. What was interesting is when you build a basketball team, you understand very well that there are 240 minutes in the game, man minutes in the game. You've got 48 minutes times 5, okay? And so, you have your 5 starters and then you have your bench. Now, the thing is this, you can't have 10 superstars on a team because, there's just not going to be enough basketballs to go around. And, you've got to balance out the egos. And so some guy's going to sit on the bench, he's going to come and give you 10, 12 minutes a game. They have to have the mentality to do that. If you have 10 superstars, the superstar's not going to be happy sitting on the bench and coming off the bench for 10, 12 minutes. Ferguson understood that. When he built his team, he had a lot of kind of marginal players who could give him, 12, 15 games a season. Who are not world beaters, but you need them in December, you need them in January, to take the weight
pressure of the other main players,
of your squad. But again, and I was always skeptical of the Galactico model simply for that reason. It did work for a few years because if you have so much money, you can do it, but the strains, the cracks begin to show, the strains begin to tell. I just don't think, and I think Chelsea often made that mistake in their earlier years. They they had too many superstars. I would actually say, even Man City to some extent make that mistake. I have to say, I still think their squad building isn't as intelligent as someone like Jurgen Klopp's at Liverpool. The way he's built his squad, I think, is masterful. Reminds me of Ferguson.
Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent point, Zafar. And I think we've spoken about this a few times as well. And I think what's really exciting for me is that you see a lot more professionalism coming into football, and a lot of it is adapted, like you said, from North American sport. And squad building is one of the key things that are become the remit of the sports director. And I think if you look at Liverpool, for instance, and they kind of identify that you have to have a mix of players. So players that are young and like pre-peak, and players that may become really, really important, somewhere down the line, but they can still add value to you in the short term. And then you have players that are at the peak, and the core of your squad should be in that peak age range or that peak performance range. And you have players like Van Dijk, Salah, Firmino, Mane, all within that 25 to 28, 29 age range, which is really good. And then you have players that are post peak but are also still veterans who can add either experience or value to the team. You have players like James Milner, like Henderson, even like entering in those.
Got to just balance it,
and that's a great balance in the squad.
And you've also got to balance your secondary players. So, for instance, I mean, what do I know? It seems to me that Klopp overplays his front three, but I think he knows what he's doing, right? So I would go with his judgment over mine. But the interesting thing is he plays them a lot. So you can't have a really top player on the bench because they wouldn't get enough play. But then he's got the kind of people on the bench. He's had Origi for a long time.
Origi, Shaqiri, players like that.
And they've got a couple of young people coming through now. Young people coming through, and that kind of works. That's why, for instance, I always thought that I still think that Man U's pursuit of Jadon Sancho is a bad idea because I think it's going to give them a logjam up front.
Yeah, no, I agreed. I think you have, like with United, some really, really good players up and coming. Like Greenwood has been super exceptional breakthrough player last year. Or last season, basically. And I mean, obviously, he's been on a really hot streak of finishing, but everything he shot seemed to end up in a goal from impossible angles. But I think even then, he's a player with a lot of talent. You have Martial, who's finally coming into his own. You knew that he had great talent, but he's finally proving it. And then you have like Rashford, who's also a pretty exceptional player.
So those three, to me, they could be Salah, Firmino, and Mane. I mean, obviously, right now they're not at that level, but I think talent-wise, potential-wise, they could be, and they're very, very young. I mean, Martial is the old, and he's only, 22, 24?
24,
and the other two are very young, So this is a great nucleus of attack to build on. So that's what I'm thinking. It works when you have three of them, and they get to play almost all the time. If you have another person thrown in the mix of that talent level, in fact, if it's Sancho, better probably than any of these three. Then you start, I don't know, there starts to be too much competition. You have to balance it out. So I'm not sure.
True. Yeah, I mean, it's true, but it's also like it's a hard call, right? Because you have on one side a player like Sancho, who's an elite level like talent, and you don't want to let him go as well because you have a chance to sign him and he wants to move to your club, and it probably comes around once every lifetime of a player like Sancho. So you want to take it, but also you want to balance it against, hey, is my are my players going to keep performing the way they've been performing? Is
And
Greenwood going to,
if you've got the money to buy Sancho, I'd rather buy a defensive midfielder and a left back.
I mean, they have been investing in the midfield as well, with Pogba kind of back and now looking like staying, and then you have Bruno Fernandes, who's done really well since he come in.
They need Kante.
True. Yeah, Matic, sure. I mean, Kante is like a hard one to find. I mean, he's like two players into one, right? The amount of ground
he's on
he covers.
The market. I understand he's being shopped around. I mean, you know.
Yeah. I think I've actually heard that. I mean, Inter have been quite interested in trying to get him off Chelsea, but I don't think Frank Lampard is going to sell him, given the team he has right now. And Kante is probably the only one who's stopping them from getting overrun in defense. But yeah, I mean, like for me, for sure, like United, I think we're under a lot of pressure. Pre-COVID, I think Solskjaer was, under the cosh of it, to be honest. But I think
as a manager, as a coach, how do you rate him?
I think it's a little hard to evaluate him immediately, but I feel like, he's at these, I mean, he's actually honestly done quite well post-COVID. I've been actually quite surprised as to how well he's done post-COVID, because pre-COVID, he looked a lot more, one-dimensional, that he could only play this, counter-attacking style of football, which was okay against, you'd get good results against, some of the like bigger teams, but he wasn't able to put away the, meatier or smaller teams that you need to kind of really challenge and win. I think he's managed to adapt that style somewhat, and they've been seeing some good results, and Bruno's signing also helped that. But I think the acid test is going to be the next few months, and I feel like it can swing still both ways. I mean, again, if I say compare him to an Arteta, I feel like Arteta, who also joined pretty much around the same time, has a little bit more gravitas or coaching know about him than he does.
Solskjaer does. Great attraction or great talent as a coach. He's a good man manager, and I think it was important. After Mourinho, morale was really low, and he knew how to get the most out of people, and I think it mattered. I think he doesn't really have that tactical know-how some of the other coaches may have. How much that's gonna trip him up in the future remains to be seen. But you mentioned Arteta. Arsenal looking great, I have to say. For those of us who are football fans and grew up sort of watching Wenger's Arsenal, it's been painful to see over the last several years, and even the last few years of his reign. But it now seems finally Arsenal are coming back to the team they once were, or at least I'm seeing glimmers of that. Can you hear? Okay, I think it's you. So if you'll just bear with us for a second, one of the occupational hazards of doing webinars and being on StreamYard is that we are held hostage to internet connection. So strangely, the gentleman in Amsterdam's internet connection is playing up. I'm sitting here in Dhaka, but my internet connection seems to be working just fine. But Zulquarnain will be back with us shortly. I shall try and keep our viewing audience, such as it is, entertained in the meantime. And you're back. Okay, no, that happens. Like I said, I think, can you hear?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. Okay,
brilliant. You were in the middle of something, I believe.
Yeah, no, I think we were just talking about Arteta, and you were making the point about how since he's joined. Yeah, and I think it's actually definitely true, the fact that you had basically Arsenal fans were probably spoiled for 15-20 years with Wenger at the helm, and him just churning out good football year on year. And I think then they had the Emery years, which were not as great, and now you have Arteta back, who's kind of one of their own. And I think Arteta's managed to bring in a sense of discipline, managed to bring the team slightly into shape. He's changed their formation, unearthed some younger players, signed Aubameyang to a longer deal, which sounds good right now. I don't know how good it's going to look 2 years down the line, but
really?
But yeah,
you're not a believer, huh?
No, I'm a complete believer in Aubameyang's talent, right? I think he's a super player, but I think I'm not a big believer in giving a 31-year-old big contract as well. So I think they fell in that same boat with Ozil as well, right? With signing him to a big contract, and I feel like that is maybe a little bit of a yeah, a little bit of a dangerous slope to be on. But
yes, no, I mean he's the captain, right?
yeah, he's the captain. Yeah,
He's the captain, and he's really kind of like the emotional heart of the team.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
in his 3 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it makes sense in now because I don't think he would be able to move to any other club as well with the amount of money that he wants. And I think he's connected to Arsenal. The fans love him. He's a really, really good player. He's been amongst the top scorers in Premier League like last 2 seasons. So obviously, he's going to add immediate value to the team that no one else in his position would be able to. So it kind of makes sense from that perspective. But let's see what happens 2 years later.
Okay, well, let's see. But no, I mean, I think, as I said, we can't underestimate the emotional connection he has and how important he is to the team in that sense, you know.
Yeah,
and that's
absolutely.
cold. Guy's 31 years old. You're like 18-month contract, and you say no more about it, huh?
I mean, football is becoming a young man's game actually now. I mean, I think more and more, if you look at the kind of physical exertion that is necessary to play football, and obviously with outliers like Ronaldo, but I feel like remember when we were kind of watching the players' peak ages were almost from like 28 to 31. And now I think that's become more like 24 to 28, right? Because I think you just need to be physically so much better.
You think players are on the downward slope after 28? That's very interesting.
I mean, maybe not all players, but I think like when you start to look like basically that 28 is an interesting cycle for players right now. I mean, for them, do they keep staying and get a big contract? Because they would want a 4-year deal at that point of time. And then many clubs are like, hey, do I give my 28-year-old player who's performing awesome now a 4-year deal, or do I give him a 2-year deal or a 3-year deal? So that's an interesting kind of like, I would say, like element that's been emerging a lot. Players at the 28, 29 were considered.
I was tested the other way around in that with greater fitness. I mean, I grew up watching football in the 70s and 80s. I'm being a little older than you, right? So, the fitness levels of players now, it's unthinkable compared to the fitness levels that, all of that stuff. And also sports science has really gone to a completely different level. So people are able to keep their players healthy.
Agreed. So it's a bit of both, right?
Careers,
It's a bit of both because, I mean, like back in the, mid 90s, early 90s, if you ever got a cruciate ligament injury, you were done for. Your career was over. Right now, you get that injury.
That's the reason you never heard of me, my friend. I tore my cruciate at the age of 19. And that ended a very promising footballing career.
I'm sure. But I think then you have like now, I mean, obviously like you said, the advancements in sports science that has led, those players to be able to play it like it was just any other injury. But then you also have, side by side, the game evolving at a, in a way where, pressing football or like, like sort of closing down space, similar to how you probably saw.
It also depends on the kind of game you play. So you see certain people whose game depends on explosive pace. Those guys often, once you turn 27, 28, it's very hard for you to keep it up. But people whose game is much more cerebral, and in terms of use of space, in terms of reading the game, they can perhaps. And so again, it depends on the player, perhaps to some extent.
Yeah, no, for sure, it depends on the player, the type of player.
Someone like sort of Michael Owen, who had a couple of fantastic years. Really, I mean, amazing. I still remember when he was like 17, 18, and just coming on the scene, and the goals he scored in again, in the World
Argentina,
Cup.
Of course,
amazing stuff, right?
But agreed. And I was reading something about Owen recently, where he said that it was all downhill from him from age 22. I mean, he did his hamstrings, and then pretty much like every time he would try to put in that extra burst of pace, he would feel it, right? And then that got into him, and then his style changed, and then he was never as good as he thought he could be, or his body just didn't let him be that good.
Yeah, this is interesting, but I also think actually that the great players are the ones who can also change their style as they age.
Agreed,
and I think a lot of footballers would in fact extend their career if they actually did that. So, for instance, interestingly enough, we just got a few minutes, but I want to sort of circle back to where we came. I would strongly think that with Messi, for instance, that if he in fact played a little deeper, that would actually be better for him in terms of the last few years of his career.
I think actually if you track Messi, and I think we're quite lucky because over the course of Messi's career, we've had really, really strong sports science and like data and so basically what you see is Messi's role also has evolved massively, right? So he's moved from being like an explosive right winger, who just beat players for pace and dribble, to becoming almost a playmaker, right? He may actually occupy the same zone in the game, but the style of play that he has is very different. He runs far less, but he runs more explosively. He does more sprints than he but he runs far less. He doesn't cover as much ground as he used to before. And even you look at someone like Ronaldo, and I remember when he came on to United. He was just a very tricky winger, right? Doing all these step overs and stuff. And now, then he kind of transformed his game to become almost a center forward, right? Where he's just basically, his goal is to score goals, right? And I think that's why both of them have had pretty long careers, and they've been lucky that they haven't had really bad injuries as well. So yeah, it's been quite interesting to see the kind of evolution of these guys, basically.
Okay, I think we're going to have to leave it there, but sure. I wish we could have had this conversation for longer, but we are out of time. Hopefully there will be more of these down the line, because, the season has just started. I think we have 8 or 9 wonderful months ahead of us. I think this has been a tough summer with the, or not even the summer, with COVID shutting down football. For people like you, this is, this is, adding insult to injury, so to speak. But this has been great. Thank you so much, and talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Zafar.
And happy
to be here.
Yes, and thank you to the audience for tuning in. Hope you will be here again same time next week. This has been a somewhat unusual Straight Talk. We don't normally talk about football, but I'm trying to expand the subject matter of Straight Talk to everything that interests me. And there are a few things that actually interest me and engage me more than football. So on that note, I'll say goodbye to everyone.